In this video, I'm gonna show you why you shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good and give you some insights into the process of building a workbench. It's been a couple of months since I posted my last video, so where have I been? Well, I've been right here in the shop working on my new workbench and outfeed table. It's still not done, but I'm pretty close.
You sure about that?
I've been documenting the entire process, so I'll be putting out another video on the entire build from start to finish sometime in the future. However, the process of building my new workbench has inspired me to make this video and talk about a few things like when it's time to level up your woodworking knowledge and skills, upgrade to newer tools, and more importantly, not let perfect be the enemy of good. There's a lot to unpack here, but I'll try my best to summarize all these points as best I can in this video and hope you'll gain something from it. Now, if you've been following my channel from the start, which truthfully may not be many who are watching this video, my first video, actually my first two videos, were on building my first workbench slash outfeed table. My name's Daver, and I'm going to show you how I made this mobile workbench, outfeed, and assembly table. It was pretty bare bones, it was practical, and it served me well until it didn't. But when I initially built it, I just wanted to have something that worked for my needs at the time and matched my current woodworking skills in order to build the bench. That was it. It did not have to be the perfect lord of all workbenches that you see in a lot of these YouTube videos. It just needed to work. Now, fast forward a few years and my shop was growing. I needed more organized space and upgrades to my shop overall. Unfortunately, I kept putting it off until it was too late. My shop had become disorganized and inefficient. And like that treadmill you bought during the holidays last year, my workbench just became a place to put more and more crap on, making it almost useless. This then spiraled into my shop overall, and it was becoming too frustrating to even want to use or make a video for this channel. I know I'm getting meta here. The heart of my shop and the main problem had been my workbench, and I let it become a barrier to my productivity. It was time for a change. Now, initially, I was only gonna modify my existing workbench to fit my new table saw. I built my original workbench to fit my previous table saw, which was slightly smaller than the new one. So that was the first thing on my list to address, or so I thought. I noticed that the middle of the workbench was sagging, and I wanted to add more reinforcement and another set of casters. After flipping it over, I realized that I had made a major error when I was originally attaching the casters to the old workbench, or should I say lack of attaching the parts, that is. I'm not sure what the heck I was thinking, but they weren't attached very well and were coming off when I was moving the workbench around. So I thought I would just reattach them, but it was starting to look pretty janky, and it was only a temporary fix to a bigger problem that I would need to face sooner or later. At that moment, I started to really think that this was time to start fresh and make a brand new workbench from scratch and also level up my woodworking skills. I also needed to decide whether to stay in my comfort zone and remake the same workbench using butt joints and pocket screws, or try to level up and make a new bench using better joinery and also adding more features, despite knowing it would take much longer, be a pain in the ass at times, cost more money, and possibly stop me from doing all other woodworking and even making Daver Made videos for a while. Obviously, I chose the latter, and here I am now, deep in the thick of it. So let's talk about how I got here and what I've learned so far. After disassembling the old workbench, the next thing to do was start designing the new one. Now, when I was doing this, I made a list of wants and desires for the new workbench. I wanted storage, lots of storage. I wanted it to be an outfeed and assembly table like the old workbench, so it needed to be big enough to accommodate both. I needed it to be mobile, and I needed it to work with my new new table saw, specifically matching the height to be an outfeed table. I also wanted to be able to attach a vise that I acquired a couple years ago now, so I could do finer woodworking eventually. It also needed to be sturdy. Now, one thing to keep in mind during the entire process is what you want to build and what you can build with your current skills, or at least new skills you could realistically acquire, may not be the same. And you don't want your design to become a barrier to completing the project. Also, when designing a project, I recommend utilizing the interwebs and stealing other people's designs like a true artist. Well, not steal, become inspired or influenced. Yes, influenced by, and make those ideas your own. That's ultimately how all art works, right? I watched a ton of videos on YouTube about workbench builds that were very similar to the workbench that I wanted to build. These videos also gave me some kind of idea on how I was going to actually build this new workbench and prepared me for the things I would need to learn. I also used Pinterest to create a board of potential ideas. And just so you know, Pinterest is not just for planning birthday parties and summer outfits. It's also a great resource for getting inspiration when planning on building any kind of new project. Now that I had a list of what the workbench would have, it was time to start sketching it out. And I was going to sketch it out at first with some rough dimensions and just kind of jot down some details that I wanted. Like most of my projects, I started drawing an idea in a notebook. And then I transferred the rough idea into SketchUp. That helped me get a better 3D visualization of what I was going to build. And it also helped me see it in a three-dimensional space to make sure that it would work. Does that make sense? Now, if you're not familiar with what SketchUp is, it's a web-based 3D modeling program that offers a free version that you can use when designing any types of woodworking projects and beyond. Now, I usually don't complete all my projects in SketchUp. I don't work start to finish in there. I feel like it slows me down, mostly because I have a lot more to learn in SketchUp. So I generally finish the project in real time. I know that is counterintuitive to the purpose of SketchUp, but you got to do what's best for you. Maybe one day I'll take the time to sit down and really learn SketchUp, but until then, I'll probably just stick with my half notebook, half SketchUp, maybe a third SketchUp, and then back into a notebook. Now that I had a visual idea of what my workbench was going to look like, I needed to figure out how to build it. I should also mention that if you don't want to design a workbench yourself, or stress out about how it's all going to fit together, there are plenty of plans out there, either through Etsy or via YouTube for workbenches, and there is no shame in going that route. I honestly almost purchased plans rather than designing my own bench from scratch, just to save any potential hassle and time. However, I wanted that experience and I wanted to gain those insights I knew I would get by doing it myself. But it's your shop and you do you. So let's talk about joints.
I found a joint in the basement.
Deciding to use a different type of joinery for my new workbench gave me the opportunity to learn a new skill. In this case, I chose lap joints for the main frame of the bench and dowel joinery for connecting the two frames together. Now, I'd used dowel joinery before, but lap joints were brand new to me. These joints are much stronger than butt joints and pocket screws and would make for cleaner lines, in theory, on the entire outside of the frame of my workbench. Now, only I'm going to notice this, but this bench is for me after all. At this point, I had the dimensions, joinery, and one side of the bench planned out, which was going to be a series of drawers. Now, I should mention that I still don't know exactly what I'm going to do with the other side of the bench, some kind of storage, but I'm still trying to figure that out in the process. If I didn't start working on the bench without knowing what the other side was going to be like, I have no idea when I would start building. And that's okay sometimes. You can't always have a plan, or at least stick to a plan. And once you start building, you have to adjust or just kind of come up with it on the fly. At least that's how I work. You may even get inspiration during the building process to make something better than you originally planned you were going to do. Once I was ready to start building, it was time to figure out what materials and how much of those materials I would need. One thing that I wanted to do was use as much available materials from the old workbench as I could. That was just to kind of save money and also not be wasteful of what I already had on hand. The only issue was that the materials I had from the old Workbench weren't really the best. However, I went through and picked the best boards from the old Workbench, ripped down the edges and cut them to the dimensions for the new Workbench. If you can, always use what you have, unless you have endless funds and you probably likely own a domino joiner or one of those fancy Harvey dust collectors. Once I chose what was available from the old Workbench, I had to figure out how much more material I would need to then complete the entire Workbench. I also figured out what sheet goods I would need and what type of plywood I would buy that was cheaper but wasn't a terrible grade for this project. Since it's shop furniture, I settled on BCX plywood for the interior of the bench and for the drawer boxes. Again, it's shop furniture, it's not fine furniture for a client, it doesn't have to be perfect.
You sure about that?
That said, lower quality materials can be a pain in the ass and they do require more forming to get square, if you will. So that is something to keep in mind. But in my case, the extra savings allow me to put that money towards some new tools, which would help me exponentially in this build. While not necessarily needed for this project, I did make the choice to get a track saw. And I also purchased a new pocket hole jig. Now I upgraded to a Craig pocket hole jig from an old Milescraft one that I bought on Amazon a few years ago, and holy cow, was it a time saver. And for me, the cost was definitely worth the convenience. I was also using the Craig Rip Cut jig originally, and I swear I'm not sponsored by Craig. And I still did use the Rip Cut jig on this project for longer cuts. I do need to buy another track, but upgrading to the Craig ACS track saw saved me so much time setting up cuts, and I was able to make more accurate cuts, which was faster overall, just breaking down the plywood that I would need for this project. Now, is upgrading tools for a new project worth it? The answer is going to be different for everyone. I like to look at the cost of the tool versus the value it is going to give me in the shop overall. And if it is something that I'm going to use more than not in the future, I will upgrade to that tool. All right, so this video is getting long. Let's fast forward to where I am now with the project. I just finished installing all the drawers, and here are some takeaways. Don't cut all of your drawer fronts at once. Try to say that 3 times fast. Don't cut all of your drawer fronts at once. Don't cut all your drawer fronts at once. Don't call it blah, blah, blah. Compounding errors will create more material waste. I had to cut my drawer fronts 2 times. Now, if you're building drawers for your shop, they don't need to be fancy. So you don't have to have dovetails or any kind of fancy joinery. It's up to you. Mine are just glued and nailed together, and they're plenty strong for what I need. Another thing that you should do is make practice cuts to minimize mistakes. You should also use spacers and shims. Drawers and drawer fronts can be challenging, but they are not impossible. I figured it out after 2 tries. Just watch videos on YouTube. There's plenty of good ones out there. I currently have one side of the bench complete. And as I mentioned before, I still need to figure out exactly what I'm doing with the other side. Some kind of storage, maybe a door or some shelving, I'm not sure. But I'll just figure it out as I go. And then I'll install the top, which will be a white sheet of melamine. And then I'm gonna edge band it with some maple for extra protection. And that's pretty much it. Maybe besides some other small details, like putting the vise on and then doing some miter slots for some jigs for the table saw. But you're gonna need to watch the video once that's out on the entire build. The overall point that I'm hoping to make in this video is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I could have made my new workbench entirely out of maple and walnut, but I used mostly pine 4x4s and 2x4s, some which were from my old workbench. My drawer boxes are made from 1/2-inch ply instead of 3/4-inch ply. And the drawer slides aren't even soft close drawer slides. And it's also not perfectly square everywhere. I did my best to kind of make it. And I also may have misdrilled a hole or 2 installing the hardware, and that's okay. If I tried to make this workbench as perfect as possible, I may have not even gotten this far. And again, this is for me, and it was meant as an exercise in learning new skills and also increasing my woodworking knowledge. This is not a paid project for a client. This is pretty much a way to educate me on the next level of woodworking. I hope you got something out of this video, and if you did, please hit the like button and subscribe if you aren't already. I appreciate you watching this video. Until next time, take care.